Today I have a Laizhou single malt aged in Amontillado Sherry Cask. And if you don't know what Amontillado Sherry is, neither did I, but I now want more whiskies aged in it. Hey there, I'm Nath Martyn, the Whisky Scribe. Taste is subjective, whiskey is diverse, and this channel is all about understanding it well enough to enjoy it on your own terms. So I've got another Laizhou whiskey here. I've done a few reviews on Laizhou now, and so I'm not going to go too much into the distillery, just enough to say that it's the largest whiskey distillery in China. They've only been laying down barrels since 2021, but the quality of what they're putting out is absolutely exceptional. It surprised me and impressed me from the very first sip, and so I've been diving through as much of their range as possible. So you can see the rest of the reviews up there. But today I've got the Amontillado Sherry Cask. Now, I hadn't even heard of Amontillado Sherry before, but it comes from the Andalusia region of Spain. And if you've been watching, I recently reviewed the Fino Sherry Cask from Laizhou. And Amontillado Sherry starts out as Fino, aging under a layer of yeast. But the difference with Fino is once the layer of yeast dies, Amontillado then spends a second period of maturation in oak so that it's got that layer of air exposed to it for further oxidization, I think. The result is meant to be that it's dry like the Fino, and has nutty flavors like almonds and hazelnut, but your Amontillado is meant to be deeper, richer, toasted sort of flavors, dried fruit complexity, along with wood, caramel, and tobacco. So Laizhou's Amontillado Sherry Cask is a single malt, aged entirely in first fill Amontillado, it's not a finish, non-age statement, natural color, non-chill filtered, bottled at cask strength 66%, and it retails here in Australia for $198. Now, as you may have already seen, last month at the World Whiskies Awards, this one took out the bronze medal for the best Chinese single malt aged 12 years and under. I actually think the whiskies that beat it were also from Laizhou, and 12 years or under is a really specific category for Chinese single malt, considering I don't think there are any Chinese single malts that are 12 years or over. But anyway, it won that category. Much darker color than some of the other Laizhou expressions. It's got a real sort of copper brown sort of amber note to it. Very, very oily. It's very thick, as you would expect, being cask strength from a distillery that most of their whiskeys sort of come across as kind of oily. And full disclosure, I have already tasted this. I tasted it a couple of weeks ago when I did a launch event for Laizhou here in Brisbane. And this is my favorite of their range so far. So I'm really, really happy to be coming back to this. But it's been a couple of weeks since I tried it. So on the nose, the nose is very, very sweet, very big. Like you have to have your mouth open when you take a whiff of this. Otherwise you're going to burn your nostrils. But you've got a lot of that brown sugar sort of sweetness going on in there. It's very, very burnt sugar sort of note. It's somehow floral at the same time, and it's got a little bit of like a plumminess to it. I'm remembering how the nose compared to the palate, so I'm just going to go back in for that. Kanbei. It's as good as I remember. So the big thing to note on this one, it's really, really interesting. Big ABV, 66%. It somehow drinks like a cask strength whiskey at the same time that it doesn't. So you get a lot of that intense alcohol going on in there, but at the same time it sort of goes down really, really easy on the palate. So that first sip, it's big and sharp and very bold. But then like after it's been in your mouth for like a second, all of a sudden it doesn't seem that massive anymore. And I think it's because it's kind of dry, so it goes down rather smooth. It's not quite as dry as that Fino Sherry Cask that I reviewed previously, but it's definitely on the drier end of things. But because it's not quite as dry as the Fino, you're getting quite a bit more of that sweetness coming through in there. So there's a lot of dried fruit sort of notes. So I mentioned plumminess on the nose. The way that's sort of coming across on the palate now, it's sort of more like your white sort of stone fruits like apricot, but it's It's so thick, it's almost like a dried fruit syrup. There's a little bit of a spicy note, but it's hard to tell whether that's flavor or whether that's actually just like the boldness of the ABV. And there's sort of like oily, almost like a coffee sort of note on the finish there. And it's very warming. Like the second you take a sip, you can feel it going from your mouth all the way through your neck, through your chest and everything. This would be a sensational whiskey on a really cold day. I could sit in the snow and sip on this one. In fact, I would probably say, if we're going to talk about who this whiskey is for, I wouldn't say this is for novices. Like if you are new to whiskey, don't try this one. It's going to scare you off in the same way that you wouldn't give somebody a bottle of Ardbeg if they're new to whiskey. This one is so high in ABV and it's so bold in flavor. It's probably for people who are maybe at least a couple of years into doing whiskey tastings, maybe. I don't know, you might just want to dive into the deep end anyway. But I would say this is for your slightly more nuanced, experienced whiskey drinkers. But for those who are ready for it, it is so good. Like I said, it's my favorite of the range so far, and I actually think it's my favorite whiskey that I've tasted so far this year. Just because it is so big and bold. There's harmony going on between those flavors. So at 66%, there's no one flavor note that's fighting for attention. They're all working together, which is what I find so impressive about it, especially considering they started laying down barrels in 2021. This would be a 5-year-old whiskey at best. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a massive distillery. They've got 600,000 barrels to play with in order to make a good whiskey. If you've got that much whiskey in your bond house and you can't make a good whiskey, you're kind of an idiot. But if you like these kinds of reviews with a bit of background on the distillery, my impressions of the whiskey, and maybe even some advice on who the whiskey would best suit, this is the sort of thing I put out each week. So hit the subscribe button so you can catch the next video. But fortunately with this whiskey, although most of what's on the bottle is Chinese, on the box there is actually tasting notes from the distillery that are being translated into English this time. So on the nose, herbal brown sugar syrup, floral notes and preserved plum. I wouldn't really disagree with any of that. In fact, I think out of all those, the only thing I didn't note before was herbal. But there definitely is sort of like this faint sort of background herbal note going on. On the palate, it says pronounced sweetness, dried apricot, syrup, dried fruit and spice. That sweetness, I would say, they say dried fruit. The only thing that they don't sort of note in there on the palate is just that dry texture that you're sort of getting on the palate itself. Like they say dried fruit as though it's just a flavor note. Got to say, it's definitely a dry, like textured whiskey. And then the finish, the only thing they've got here is chocolate powder notes. I don't know what that means. Is that what it says on the carton here? Where did I put the carton? So supposedly on the finish, okay, here it just says deep layered complexity and full-bodied robust finish, which, yeah, I can agree with that. The notes from the distillery say chocolate powder notes. I did say coffee. Maybe what they're meaning is sort of like a powdered dark chocolate. Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, there is sort of like a cocoa powder sort of note to that, was what I was calling coffee. Chocolate, yeah, chocolate powder, cocoa powder. That's probably kind of accurate. Yeah, so the distillery tasting notes are pretty much on par with what I was getting there. Like I said, this is a beautiful whiskey, and unfortunately it's the last of the Laizhou whiskies that I've got to review here. You may have seen I've done a whole range of them, pretty much everything that's available in Australia now. I didn't review on this channel the Mongolian Oak because that was a very limited release. I had the opportunity to taste that at an event, but it was only like 5 or 10 ml pour because it was like a $3,000 bottle because it was the world's first Mongolian Oak whiskey. I'm hoping that we'll see some other releases of that in the future that might be a little bit more obtainable because it was a really interesting flavor note. But I'm excited for what else is going to come out of Laizhou because so far I've really enjoyed everything. They're producing whiskey at a really, really high quality, and I think I've just seen that they, like in the last week or two, they've released a Pedro Ximénez sherry cask. Not a finish, single malt aged entirely in Pedro Ximénez. So I'm really keen to see that one. I'm really hoping I get an opportunity to taste that here. Have you tasted it, or have you tasted the Amontillado Sherry Cask? Would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. In fact, you know what? Let all these reviews on Laizhou whiskey be a little bit of a lesson there, that be open to trying new things, because New World whiskey can always surprise you. I love Scotch. I'm always going to come back to Scotch, but I'm so happy that I tried these, because this is so interesting, and it's close to Scotch in terms of quality, but it's still like a little bit more unique. It's China's own spin on it, which is the sort of thing I like to see from a New World whiskey. So I'm so glad I had the opportunity to try the Laizhou range, and I'll definitely be keen to jump on whatever's next from them, including that Pedro Jimenez cask. Yeah, with that in mind, don't be afraid to try new whiskies. Enjoy what's in your glass. Happy Lunar New Year, and Gambay. You could be my favorite whiskey of the year.